Good morning. I'm John Shamby with the CRB board. Want to make sure you stop by and visit the exhibit booths on level 2 and make plans to attend the Team UMG lunch at the Ryman today at 11:30. Trust me, make plans. There's always a memorable something that happens at that event. We're so proud to once again have Bob Kingsley's Country Top 40 as a sponsor. Bob Kingsley has been a longtime supporter of the songs of country music and the songwriters who create them. He will again be hosting Acoustic Alley, featuring hit songwriters tonight in the Legends Ballroom. In addition, Bob Kingsley's Country Top 40 is the official sponsor of the CRS 2019 attendee bags distributed at registration and the CRS agenda guide that is helping you get around this year. I'd like to thank Bob Kingsley's Country Top 40 for their commitment to country music and support of CRS. Also like to acknowledge ASCAP Nashville, a longtime partner with CRS. Once again, ASCAP is keeping your thirst at bay by sponsoring the bar at Acoustic Alley. They'll be offering complimentary drink tickets to all attendees, so make sure you stop by tonight, 7 o'clock, at the Legends Ballroom, Level 2. We're grateful for ASCAP's continued support this year at CRS. Also proud to have the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum sponsor CRS again this year. We hope you took advantage of the time yesterday to see the museum galleries. In addition, the museum will be hosting the 90s Country Night at CRS for attendees in the event hall today from 5 to 7 p.m., followed by the tour of the museum. We are beyond grateful for the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum's support and lucky to have such good neighbors. On another note, if you're not planning to stay for the New Faces of Country Music dinner and show, we ask that you please turn in your New Faces ticket at the registration desk. The title of this session, The Metrics That Matter to Predict Radio Hits. And I present to you the moderator of this session, Bob Richards.
Good morning, and get ready for a lot of data, but as it's been said before, that knowledge is power. Really, the formula is knowledge plus execution is power. Matt Sunshine from CSS reminded me of that just a few days ago. That's what we're going to provide you today. Tons of data and knowledge, and then we'll talk through how you put that into action so you can make better decisions that lead to better outcomes. So to begin, in a few minutes, Jeff Green is going to join you and roll through some just great information. But before that, Tori Nugent from Warner Nashville is going to step through and kind of level set on consumption definitions. And if you're sitting in the back, we suggest you come up forward because there's a mouse pad that has all of these definitions on it that will help you when you head back to the station. So here's Tori to start us off today.
Thank you. Hello, good morning. First of all, honestly, on a personal note, I just want to say what an honor it is to be a part of this panel this year. The metrics that matter has always been my favorite part of CRS, so to be sharing the stage with these people, and Jeff Green specifically, is like my data hero. So thanks for being with us today. So as Bob mentioned, everyone should have a takeaway that they can take home at the end of this that will hopefully be a helpful reference tool for you and your markets when you're having conversations with labels or partners about what consumption and equivalence actually mean when we're throwing those terms around. So I won't run through every metric on your mouse pad, but generally speaking, Jeff's going to be sticking to the top half of this and talking a lot about track equivalents, track equivalent sales. So you'll see here, one track is roughly the equivalent of 125 paid on-demand streams or 375 ad-supported streams. So that makes sense kind of intuitively that we're applying a heavier weight towards streams that are paid versus ad-supported. For RIAA reporting purposes, so when a track gets certified gold or platinum, there's not a weighting system in place right now, so their equivalent conversion rate is one track is the equivalent of 150 on-demand streams, and that's either audio or video. Two metrics that Jeff is going to be talking a lot about in his presentation are the idea of streams per spin and Shazams per spin. So here we're showing consumption per spin, which is a metric that we at Warner Music Nashville love. If you've seen any of our reports, you've probably seen consumption per spin being included in our charts. And that's essentially weekly track equivalent sales divided by weekly monitored airplay spins. And we tend to look at that on the national level, but you can also, calculate that metric at the local level if you're interested in that. Shazams per spin, everyone probably understands that concept. It's just weekly Shazam tags divided by monitored airplay spins. And again, you can either look at that on the national level or at the local level. Album equivalents, same concept as track equivalent, same conversion metrics. It's just everything is taken times 10 to get you to albums. And then there are a few other terms to know at the bottom that I won't go through today, but hopefully you'll find this a helpful tool and reference piece, again, when you're having data-driven conversations. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Jeff Green for an amazing 20-minute presentation, and I will see you guys again at the end for a panel discussion. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks so much for getting up today to be part of this. First, many thanks to CRS, the CRS Agenda Committee, Country Air Check, Media Base, Nielsen BDS Radio, and Nielsen Music. And thanks to all of you who participated in our third annual Music Decision Survey on what most and least influences you on new ads and increasing spins. The full report is in Country Air Check's CRS print pub, available now on a newsstand near you. The Music Decision Survey also raised a lot of money for several beloved charities, so thank you for that as well. And finally, there's no need for you to take any notes. This deck is available for free through the CRS app, and it's free as always through stonedoormedialab.com later on about 1 o'clock here. It'll be ready. In baseball, managers, coaches, and scouts rely on terms such as on-base percentages and slugging percentages to predict what a batter will do at the plate. In football, we talk about quarterback ratings and yards after catch and passes defended as to grade past performance and to anticipate what might happen in the next game. These statistics were once unfamiliar and pretty geeky, actually, but now they're used all the time to determine who gets playing time. They turn data into information, information into knowledge, and knowledge into entertainment. And that's what you in radio do too. And because music usage or consumption is so measurable now, let's get comfortable with some of the new statistics of our own. Sports teams have GMs, coaches, and scouts, and they get paid to be right, but they're often completely wrong, of course, in both overestimating and underestimating what will happen under certain conditions. They realize, though, that no data is infallible. Far from it. But just as in the sports world uses data, broadcasters and music industry folks can use these new benchmarks to measure progress on artists on their new releases. And I'm here to share some of those with you now. This panel promised to give you 5 metrics to find predictive forces in country music. So here they are, what you could call from reaction to traction. I've listed them chronologically from when a single is first added at radio, then measuring its progress along the way, checking its streams per spin, Shazams per spin, and Pandora thumbs ups, and then how fast a single picks up stations and spins as it moves up the chart. Before a single can be consumed, it first has to get on the menu, right? So batting first is something familiar to all of us, most added. I know. Most added is all hype, or it's the result of some promotional spin program, or it's about a show of loyalty to an artist, or even a corporate mandate. But no wonder, and because of those reasons, no wonder only about 1/3 of PDs and MDs in the survey regarded most added as influential. However, when many of you highly experienced programmers, who happen to be blessed with golden ears, by the way, collectively agree to add a record, regardless of the reason, the results stand out. Singles that ever made the top 3 most added in any given week have delivered nearly all the number ones. Scotty McCreery, who's number 1 this week, was the last artist who didn't do it, and that was almost a year ago with 5 more minutes. Not all most added leaders rack up the same number of ads, of course, and since 2016, the number 1 most added single has averaged 58 stations, and the number 2 most addeds have averaged 35 stations. So when you see singles beating those averages, think 60 and 35 to round it off, they're worth a close look. The bottom line is that when a single is among the most addeds, it's usually meant a very good outcome. Of course, singles don't all have to be among the top 3 most added to be successful. Singles that showed steady early momentum by ranking among the top 10 most added 5 or more consecutive weeks far outperformed charting singles in general. A fast start out of the gate is a bit like a running back who runs a 4.2 40. It doesn't guarantee that he'll score in every game, but I probably still want him in my fantasy league. When we talk about consumption, we mean a combination of digital and physical sales plus streams. But we need relevance to know what heavy consumption actually is. And it's important to do this because the survey shows that PDs and MDs care about consumption a lot. Most of non-radio country music programming is streaming. It's consumption, that is. It comes from streaming. And if you're wondering how fast audio streaming is growing, Nielsen says it's rapidly dominating country consumption. Apart from radio and digital radio, the majority of country consumption, 55%, as you see there in the first half of 2018, and rising pretty fast, is now on-demand audio. The figure's in red. Soon, the overwhelming share of non-radio consumption may be streaming, as it already is in other formats. Nielsen says that in 2018, total on-demand audio song streams rose 50% in 1 year. So let's say you learn that a particular single is getting 1 million streams a week. So you ask, well, how important is that? So here are some new country streaming benchmarks or thresholds. These numbers are probably good for the next 6 months or so, but then they'll need to be updated as streaming continues to multiply like rabbits. The typical airplay rank for a country single getting 1 million streams is right here in gray. Right there, those figures there. Ranking between 31 and 40 nationally. This grid shows how much streaming is happening at various airplay chart ranks. Watch for new singles that are blowing the roof off in streaming, especially if it's for more than just 1 week. If they're getting a lot of streaming compared to airplay, check them out. Without radio support, heavy streaming can still happen because of curated playlists, satellite radio exposure, and various streaming algorithms. But this chart shows country radio's power. The more you play a single, the more streaming activity it generates. However, don't assume that a sudden spike in streaming without radio isn't legit. Kelsey Ballerini's Miss Me More was at 45 the week of the CMA Awards, averaging 8 spins a week. After the CMA, she jumped up almost 300,000 streams, and then another 600,000 the following week, while country radio bumped it up just an average of 1 spin a week. To understand all these per spin statistics, it helps to look at how many spins is a lot. This grid shows how spins stack up by airplay rank. We see here, up in red, that a number 1 single averages 50 or more spins a week, 54 to be precise, almost 8 per day, around the clock, compared to a song at the bottom at 50, which averages close to 8 a week. So if you see stations spinning a single 20 times a week, that's only at 40 on the chart, something's going on. It could be a hunch, maybe a spin program, or maybe it's generating strong local response. This chart can help you identify something way out of the norm that's worth looking at. The second of our 5 metrics that matter is streams per spin. But streaming is constantly growing, so when do you measure it? We take a snapshot at a consistent moment in time, the single second chart week, because that's when about half or more of the reporting stations have started playing a single in some kind of regular rotation. This chart shows how country singles that generated a lot of streams per spin early in their chart life usually peaked higher and were more likely to reach #1 than those that didn't. Let's look more closely. The average single generates about 1,300 streams per spin in its second chart week and peaks at around 16. The underline figures in terracotta color. That's what my wife calls it. About 40% of them go #1. So a single that registered 1,000 streams per spin in its second chart week is behaving like one that's likely to reach inside the top 20, maybe much higher. But newer singles, like the ones in red that produce 3,000 or more streams per spin in their second chart week, those up there in red, have been twice as likely to reach #1 and peak on average well inside the top 10. Not only have we found a correlation in country between early streams per spin and chart outcomes, there's also a relationship between early streams per spin and its flight path to the top. Future #1 records that receive 3,500 or more streams per spin early on, the figures in red, typically reach #1 several weeks sooner than all others. So how do you get this streams per spin data? From your label reps. Streams per spin, ask for it by name. The next slide to show you is that the survey shows that just 25% of PDs and MDs regard Shazam as influential, even though it's one of the world's most popular apps. Maybe that skepticism exists because programmers just aren't sure how to measure it. Let's see if we can make Shazam data more easy to understand. When Jane Consumer streams from her smartphone, desktop, or satellite, she can see the artist and title. But if she overhears a stream in a mall, office, or restaurant, or often while listening to radio, she can't. And so she triggers her Shazam app to get the artist and title. In short, Shazam measures initial interest. This curiosity, which is usually a positive thing, helps build familiarity, which is essential to call-out. And survey says call-out is more important to country programmers than anything else. But how do we interpret Shazam data? When we hear that a new single has received a lot of Shazam tags, what does that mean? Well, here you go. A single that has picked up 125,000 Shazams, the one in blue there, about fourth on the list, is behaving like a single that's already in the top 20. By the time a single reaches #1, if it gets there, we're talking country now, it's collected on average 350,000 total Shazams, the figures in red. You'd think superstars would already be familiar enough that they'd get fewer Shazams than newer artists, but I'm not seeing evidence of that. And even if Jane Consumer recognizes the lead voice, who is that female singing with Kenny Chesney or Jason Aldean or Keith Urban anyway? And what's the name of that song? You get the idea. Access to total Shazams for virtually any song is free. Here's where to find it. Go to Shazam.com. There's no need to log in. Just type in the corner up there the name of the artist and title. And it is hard to see here on this slide because of the big room we're in. But at your desktop or smartphone, you can easily see the cumulative Shazam totals, where my pointer's going, in gray on the left. Your label reps have someone who's keeping track of Shazam data week to week, so ask how many new Shazams their singles are generating. Let's say you hear that a new single is generating 10,000 Shazams per week. The figure in green in the middle there tells us that those 10,000 Shazams are equivalent to a single that's performing between 16 and 25 on the chart. The more Shazams per week, the stronger the record generally turns out. A good example would be Jimmy Allen's Best Shot, which was getting more than 30,000 Shazams a week by the time it hit the top 10. No wonder you guys voted to have him on New Faces tomorrow night. The third of the 5 metrics that matter is Shazams per spin, again in a single second media-based airplay chart week. Shazams per spin helps forecast 3 things: how high a song will peak on the chart, what proportion will reach #1, and how long it may take to get to #1 if it even gets there. Based on studying nearly 300 singles, the median Shazam data in the second chart week are the figures in gray at the top. They got 5.85 Shazams per spin and peaked on average at 16. About 41% reached #1 and took 25 weeks to get there. But singles that scored higher Shazams per spin, the numbers in green, terracotta, and especially red, far outperformed all others. The singles in red, which averaged 12 or more Shazams per spin in chart week 2, peaked inside the top 5. Most reached #1 and got there as much as 3 months faster. There are many exceptions, but you see the pattern here. Once you've Shazammed a song, of course, you know what it is, so you're not likely to do it again. So as airplay and familiarity increase, Shazams per spin naturally decline. By the time a single reaches #1, its average Shazams per spin is down to about a 2. The key, therefore, is to use this predictive statistic early on. Ask your label reps what their new single Shazams per spin rate is, especially that second chart week. If it's a big number, chances are good it's going to be successful 3 to 6 months later. Only about 20% of PDs and MDs in the survey regarded Pandora as influential. Skeptics may say Pandora listeners aren't radio listeners, or at least not heavy radio listeners. But did you know that Pandora and country radio agree on the top 10 hits most of the time? 82% of the time, in fact. And that's over the past 2.5, almost 3 years now. Country radio and Pandora do have a few of their own top 10s, but they're often top 15 on the other as well. Pandora has millions of country listeners. In fact, 25% of Pandora's top 100 are country singles. Most of what Pandora listeners hear isn't just decided by some curator somewhere. It's based on listeners' pre-selected music interests and their responses to what gets played. You may not know this, but Pandora does offer labels, artists, and managers song data at the local level. And since you in radio said local data is really important, why not use it? Beyond agreeing most of the time with country radio on the top 10s, Pandora is on average 7 weeks ahead of radio. This can be useful when deciding whether to move a single up in rotation, and some examples of that in a moment. Okay, Jeff, so lots of Pandora airplay is an early indicator of a top 10. But Pandora's listeners provide valuable feedback, such as signaling a thumbs up, which tells Pandora to play a song more often. Labels have this info, but you can see for yourself the number of Pandora thumbs up on a single over the past week, the past month, or the past year by creating a free account on Next Big Sound. It takes less than a minute to get set up. Since Pandora and country radio agree on the hits most of the time, how many thumbs up does a new single need to show us it's likely to be a hit at country radio? And how about a grid to go by? So here you go. This fourth metric that matters is something you've never seen before. If just 2% of all the spins Pandora gave a country single in its second airplay chart week generated a thumbs up, the figures in red, that single reached #1 68% of the time and peaked at around 8. That's way more often than the 41% average, the figures in gray, and twice as high a peak as the average charting single. Notice that we're talking about really tiny percentages here. Think of a professional baseball player who bats .250. He's an average hitter at best, right? But if he hits .300, he's in the All-Star game. The Boston Red Sox, who won the World Series last fall, batted .268, just 3% better than the Baltimore Orioles, who finished 61 games back. No wonder a single that historically gets 1% thumbs up early on typically doesn't do anywhere near as well as one receiving 2%, which is essentially twice as many when you think about it that way. So the point here is that small differences can make big differences. The fifth metric that matters is a speed statistic, chart growth, which is important to nearly 2/3 of survey respondents. An example of chart growth is when you see that a single is top 20 after just 10 weeks. So is that good? Well, here you go. This grid shows how future #1s moved up the chart considerably faster than the average single. At 5 weeks, future #1s were at about 30 on the chart compared to 37 for all charting singles. So when you see a single is top 20 after 10 chart weeks, it's behaving like a future #1. Luke Combs' Beautiful Crazy is a good example. At 5 weeks, it was at 17. At just 9 weeks, this week, it's at 3. Fastest in recent history. You get the idea. You might hear someone say, all our data says this is a hit. So let's overlay all of what you could call the data DNA on 4 recent number ones, written in the sand, speechless, round here buzz, and broken halos. Key metrics are grouped here chronologically. In purple, what we have is the most added, the highest rank among the most added, the most ads generated in any particular week, and the number of consecutive weeks among the top 10 most added. Next, below the line, is we take a single's temperature, if you will, in its second chart week to get Shazams per spin, its streams per spin, and its thumbs up ratio. Then, after the 5th chart week, we look at its airplay rank. Following that, we check its Pandora country peak, which usually ends after 16 weeks. The figures in red that you see are better than average. Those in black are average range, and those in blue are below average. All of these number 1 records scored well above average in most of the statistics, as you see. All were either number 1 or number 2 most added. All were among the top 10 most added at least 5 straight weeks. Nearly all had very high early Shazams per spin and streams per spin scores, and all had very high thumbs up ratios early on. They all peaked top 5 or better on Pandora, and all reached top 10 ahead of radio, 15 weeks ahead for Chris Stapleton and 13 for Eric Church. Together, these metrics can help gauge potential for a current single at various points in its life cycle. All those figures in red testify why they all went number 1. It's because they're great records, they had great label and radio support behind them, and also because the supporting data was there. Now let's take a look at singles by artists with their first number 1s in the past year. Most got off to a good start for being among the most added, but not several weeks in a row, and none of them appeared to be going anywhere fast at radio after 5 weeks. But look at the early outside data indicating these would be hits. All of them scored highly on at least 1 or more of the newer metrics, Shazams and streams and thumbs up, and they all hit top 10 on Pandora ahead of radio. Finally, let's rank all of these stats to see which offer the most likely outcomes for number 1. Remember that about 40% of all charting singles reach number 1, but as we see here, all of these indicate an above average history of delivering number 1s and higher average chart peaks. By the way, the full report that you can see on the app or through our website gives you the top 15 scenarios. So here again is our summary of 5 metrics that matter. Most added, strong second chart week action and streams per spin, Shazams per spin, and Pandora thumbs up, reaching Pandora top 10, and rapid airplay chart growth, especially in the first 5 weeks or so. So in conclusion, we're all flying by instruments these days. So why don't we use them? If you think about an NFL team that's number 1 in offense or defense throughout the season, it's probably going to the playoffs. But if you use this data, you can help find out which singles are going to the playoffs too. Thanks very much. And now we're going to bring everybody up and talk about all this stuff.
Jeff? Let's hear it again for Jeff. That's not easy to do. Taking that information and turning it into a story and having it make sense is what we're going to continue to try and do for you now. And I'd like to reintroduce Tori Nugent. Tori is the Vice President of Research and Analytics at Warner Nashville. Nancy Wilson is the Program Director of WHKO in Dayton. And you guys know Jeff by now. So let's jump right in. Jeff, there was a piece of information that you referenced in your presentation that is in the most recent edition that you guys pick this up too. The information's in the app, and that piece of data is about how local research and local data is more important now to program directors and music directors than ever before. So when it comes to local call-out research, why do you think now it has risen to such a high level when we have all of this data and all of these analytics?
Well, I think you all, the mantra is radio's local, right? I mean, you have so many competitors. It is your competitive advantage. And so I think programmers are saying, how do I know what's going on here? You know, that's all great, Jeff, all this national chart stuff, but, you know, and streaming and all those. But the labels do have this stuff broken out locally. Nielsen breaks out streaming information at the street level, you know, at your own town. So that if a label can use that, I mean, if a radio station can use that, why not? I mean, absolutely, I think that's the differentiator.
So let's see a show of hands. Who here does local call-out research? Now, not a web survey, but call-out research. Let's see.
Wow,
Okay,
lots.
pretty good. Nancy, do you do call-out
Absolutely.
at your station?
Yeah, we do.
And how do you use that when it comes to all of this data? Does that lead the way?
You know what? It's kind of like an exclamation point for us. You know, we've got all these different ways that we can see what kind of songs that folks want to hear. So when we get the call-out research back, that tends to be like, okay, we're on the right track, or maybe there's something that we're not on yet that we need to be on. It's really interesting to see when the two marry up that you're on the right track for a record.
So Jeff set us up with some benchmarks when it comes to data and how to make sense of those. With call-out research, fill us in on benchmarks that you use that help you make those decisions. Benchmarks that you can share with the audience that they may either reset some that they've been using for years or kind of confirm what they're doing now.
Well, I think the biggest thing that you can do is listen to your audience. They're going to tell you what kind of records that they want to hear. You know, you still got the old-fashioned phone, if you all still take phone calls in the studio. If you have an app, things they vote on the app. We look at Shazam a lot. We also look at Pandora likes, we check out Spotify, and we also really take advantage of the consumption numbers that Tori was talking about a little bit earlier that we get from the record labels. And you can get those anytime that you want to from your rep, just ask for them. And those are kind of the benchmark things that we look at, Bob, about what kind of songs we're going to play or what category it's going to be in.
So Tori, one last question on this subject. Do you hear from your field reps that they're hearing back from PDs and MDs that there's more local research information?
Absolutely. I think it's honestly become one of the most common questions that we get from our regionals is to provide them ammunition to have conversations with you guys that is localized and really specific to your market. So I don't know if we want to show the slide now, but the next one. The next one, yeah. So this is just a snapshot of like example market level consumption versus airplay grids that we've pulled. This one was specifically for Dan and Shay Speechless. But this just shows within each market what is the consumption story relative to other songs that are getting airplay in those markets. So it really provides like a granular, competitive perspective that I think has become a super valuable tool for our team when they're working songs to radio, yeah.
So I can hear people asking now, how can I get this information for my market?
Yeah, it's from, I mean, we pull this from Nielsen Music Connect, but obviously ask, like you said, Nancy, just ask your label partner. We're more than happy and more than equipped to pull this information and make it really specific to you guys and what your needs are.
So we're going to dive into Jeff's top 5 that you saw. We're going to start with most added. And Jeff, most added again on the list in one of those top spots. And you acknowledge that it is one of those indicators that is most open to influence. Why do you think it still continues to make the list if that's the case?
I think there's a collective sorority, fraternity among programmers. It's not one you want to say, well, I'm a sheep and I just follow the crowd. But I think there's a certain understanding that, well, we can't all be wrong, and we can't all be on a corporate mandate. And when I've looked at this stuff going back to 2006. So this data continues to sustain itself. I mean, I have no agenda here. If the data didn't show up, I'd report that. But it does. And it does these, basically, if you're among those leaders, it's a filtering process, and the programmers seem to, it works out.
So Tori, I'm going to ask you to take a little bit of a contrarian view. Give us an example of when a song did not reach this metric, but went on to become a huge hit. Because we all have amnesia, and when a song's a hit, we want to think that, oh no, we were on board from the beginning, but that's not always the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty common thing, honestly, but the most perhaps famous example in our building would be Brett Eldridge Don't Ya, which is pretty old now, but it certainly was not the most added record out of the box. I think it took like 8 weeks to chart and obviously went on to be a huge #1 record and kind of a career-defining, trajectory-setting record for Brett. So yeah, I mean, most added is certainly something that we look at and strive for. Dan and Shay was most added, so things are looking good for that song as of this week. But it's not the make or break metric by any means for us.
So Nancy, would you say that is in your top 5 most added when you consider songs that you're going to play?
Not necessarily. I think that we look in Dayton, and this is for the Dayton market, we look at songs that are more organic. What's the organic growth that they have had? And that's a good indication of how that song is going to be doing. If a song is most added, like Jeff was attesting to, you don't know if that's, got a lot of push behind it, if that's something that is, that one group in particular is wanting to push, if it's, on the verge kind of record. And it's not something that we'll look at it and we'll take into consideration, but it's not something that we have to use.
So moving on to streaming, it's, I think, the one piece of data that I often hear about, and while Jeff did a fabulous job at showing us the number of streams and where that may end up or dictate in chart position-wise, when you hear millions of streams and billions of streams, it can be overwhelming. So Tori, when it came to you putting together your consumption formula, how did you go about doing that? How, from streaming, which is a giant piece of that formula, how did you figure and weight what goes into that?
So if you go back to the previous slide now, if we can go back. This is something that we sort of use as an initial read every week. We look at this every Monday and evaluate where our records are on the terrestrial airplay chart and how they stack up versus what we call like airplay consumption norms. So basically, it's just similar to what Jeff showed earlier. He has a streaming version of this chart, but this actually also incorporates just traditional track sales and equivalents. And essentially, this shows that a typical top 10 record, on average, does about 24,000 equivalents a week. 4,300 of those come from tracks, and about 3 million of them come from on-demand streams. There are departures from these norms. These are not the end-all, be-all, but it's a really good starting place for just kind of seeing how we're stacking up against other records that are on a similar place on the airplay chart. So this is an 8-week, I think to answer your question, this is an 8-week rolling average that we use. So this is how the norms look as of this week, but next week they might look a little bit different. And it's a fluid sort of set of norms that we're evaluating against.
Nancy, how do you use streaming data? How do you access your local streaming data? And do you have your own formula for consumption?
We do use streaming data a lot, Bob, because there are indications for the Dayton market, and you can go to BDS Radio and get that. You can sign up for that at no cost. But we will see a song, and we'll track it, kind of like Tori was talking about. Some things can change week to week, but if a song is looking like it's going to be a monster, for example, Luke Combs' Beautiful Crazy, I don't know about all y'all in your markets, but that song was showing up like last year, and we would have been ready in Dayton to add that, but the label was like, no, we've got 2 more singles before that one. So you're going to have to hold off on that one. And as soon as they said, okay, we're going with this as the next single, we put it in our breakout category, which is a category that gets listeners used to a song that's temporary, maybe up to 200 spins to see what kind of testing it gets. And then it immediately went into power. Landco is another song, Greatest Love Story, that we just saw local streaming numbers were huge. And also Dylan Scott always shows up very high. Hooked showed up very high in the Dayton market for streaming. And we just kept an eye on that one, and eventually we went with that in a higher rotation sooner than others.
Do you use those raw numbers, or do you have a formula to pull it into all of this other data?
we kind of use the raw data and then kind of marry it together with the other data that we have and look for the common denominators. And you can really find what the commonalities are going to be with a record. If it's showing up one place and there's one record that is right now, but it's not showing up anywhere else. So we're holding back on that one to see if it's going to be consistently streaming for us in Dayton.
Kind of like a magic eye puzzle where when you look at it, it just kind of...
It's a unicorn, Bob.
Yeah. So Jeff, we're taking all of this data at face value, that it is accurate and it reflects listener behavior. Ryan Wild, Program Director of Hank FM in Indianapolis, and I were talking. Ryan previously programmed AOL Radio, and he talked about how superfans, now this is a while back, superfans could influence how songs were ranked in AOL Radio. Well, we're now pretty far removed from that. Is there a possibility for groups of superfans to influence streaming data or any of the other platforms that you've got here?
I watch for that, and every, once or twice a year, I'll see a spike for a week, where a record will go from, 500,000 streams to 3 million, and then it'll go down to 200,000 or something. He says, what? And it disappears. So you never know what actually sparked that. But generally, I find that it's just too complicated. For like Pandora Thumbs Up, you're talking about records that are getting 500,000 plays. To go from 1% to 2% would require thousands and thousands of people participating and wanting to make it happen. And if the record isn't that good, I think at some point you'd get some brushback. It seems far-fetched, to be honest with you, to be any kind of a reliable, manipulatable statistic. I keep watching it though, but it's very rare that I see anything, and even weird anomalies for more than a week.
So if there's anyone left just denying the data because of the possibility of manipulation, sounds like that just isn't likely.
Very unlikely. At least right now, there's more data that we keep looking at and to see if there are patterns there, because we just don't know. But yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say that what you see is pretty honest. I think that the skepticism about most added, I get that, because it's a very small group of people and there's a lot of reasons why there could be a particular push. But when you're talking about this kind of large scale, I don't think so.
Another platform that, Jeff, since you've been doing this survey, has predicted hit songs is Shazam. So Nancy, how does that figure into formula? Where do you get that information?
Well, the information's available to anybody. It's very easy to get. I think it's Shazam.com. Jeff would know, and then you just put your market in, and then we'll show you. And in the Dayton market, it tends to be a lot of CHR songs, but in the top, is it the top 30, top 40? There are usually at least 5 or 6 country records, and then we will follow that week by week by week. If there's a song that just pops up that hadn't been on there, like Beautiful Crazy, for example, had been on there a year ago. So you just kind of keep an eye on that one and see if it's consistent, like Tori was talking about with consistency, or if it's just one of those in and out kind of records. But we could still be playing Tequila in Power if we wanted to, because it's still showing up on Shazam that much.
I would encourage programmers to take a look at the records that are outside the top 50 as well. You'll see some records that are just debuting now or getting close to debuting, and some of them you can see pretty far out. Far out on the horizon, you can see that there's something really going on there.
So Tori, what's available to most people is that kind of top-line data when it comes to Shazam. Can you dig deeper and look for stories that help you determine, okay, no, this really is a hit song?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it varies a little bit by label, the amount of data that they've got access to. We're able to see market level Shazam tags, so like the actual number of tags within markets. And we can provide a little bit of competitive context, but we don't have access to all of that competitive data. But yeah, I mean, certainly it's always worth asking if we can provide more data. I think Warner Nashville, at least, we're a label where we like to be open and transparent and give you as much information as you can to make good decisions. So always ask.
On to Pandora. Jeff, I think that what you showed us was that Pandora is the platform where a small difference in percentage can make a big difference in outcome in whether a song is going to be a hit on the charts or not. Let us know and maybe provide some caution about how to use that data because there is that small variation in percentage that can lead to a pretty big difference in outcome.
I look at the extremes. You know, when you're talking about between 1.3% and 1.6%, it's also, you know, I will look at something over a 4-week period, for example, rather than just one particular second chart week. I would watch it to see if the data sustains itself, and are those averages holding, are those percentages holding up over time? And they usually do. I mean, because these sample sizes are so large, it is pretty stable. So I would look at that, but if you start to see something in the 2.2, 2.3, that's really tremendous. I mean, as opposed to a record that's at 0.7 or something like that. And we have some examples of some records that are struggling right now, and the Pandora data basically said it would. And that kind of makes sense. I mean, these are consumers that are reacting just the way, I mean, these are different people. These are country music lovers, and you know, they're not that different, and so they will respond. So it doesn't surprise me. What I didn't know is that, for example, in classic hits, for example, you could see records at 4 or 5%. Maybe it's a different kind of audience. Maybe the passion level for a Hotel California or a Bohemian Rhapsody is a lot different from a current country record. So we do see some differences, and we're looking at that too. In fact, we looked at the Mediabase just published its Power Gold Top 100 in Country Air Check a few weeks ago, and so I analyzed all of those. And the numbers are lower than you see with currents, which you'd expect because these records are older, but the pattern is pretty interesting. And I'll send that to you guys too if you want.
So the one no-brainer on the list, I think, is rapid chart growth. And Nancy, when it comes to you making decisions, how does that play in? When you see a song just skyrocket, does that influence how you're going to convert the song?
It's something that we definitely look at.
Yeah?
But it's not a song that goes up high on the, that's something that we definitely do look at, Bob, but there's all the other factors that we take into account as well. What's going well in the Dayton area may not necessarily reflect what's going on across the country. So we take the data that we have that is available to us for our Dayton market, and then we'll take into account the charts, because sometimes those songs go, you all know this, they go up so quickly on the charts, and then they're gone, and your listeners don't even know what the song is yet. They haven't had a chance to be familiar with it.
By the way, we apologize. We were short-spaced and don't have time for Q&A, but all of our panelists are available afterwards, and you'll have their information in the app. Please seek them out and continue the conversation. Tori, a question for you, a piece of advice for the room when it comes to compiling all this data, and how do you do that? How do you wrangle it all and do it in a way that maybe you can automate, or do it on a 1 or 2 person staff that most of the stations and maybe even some other groups are looking at, trying to bring it all together?
I am very lucky in that I have a really talented analyst, Addie, who's hopefully in the room, who helps me. And she's really good at making automated reports. But yeah, I mean, certainly there are like just basic Excel formulas. If you want to spend a little bit of time just learning Excel, I would definitely recommend it. And also just really lean on your label partners, because we're here for you, and we want to help make this as easy as possible for you.
And Nancy, we're going to squeeze the last one in
Sure.
for you. How do you do that at the station level? How do you bring all this data together without having it overwhelm your workday?
Because we're looking at it all the time. You know, that is just something that for us is just part of our everyday workday. Oh, did you see, it's after a certain amount of time, we could look at Mediabase, we could look at BDS. And we also keep in very close contact with our label partners as well. And anytime that we have a question or we're looking for some more data, they're always very quick to provide it to us. So just ask.
Tori, Nancy, Jeff, thanks so much, and thank you.
Thank you.